Marcus Webb woke up every morning at 5:30. Not because he wanted to. Not because some alarm forced him out of bed with a loud sound. He woke up because a small hand would tap his shoulder and a tiny voice would whisper, "Daddy, I'm hungry." That was his life. That was his whole world. A 7-year-old boy named Jaylen in a one-bedroom apartment on the east side of Columbus, Ohio. Marcus was 34 years old. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and had a quiet kind of strength about him. The kind that comes not from a gym, but from carrying heavy things for a long time. He worked 2 jobs. During the day, he drove a delivery truck for a local shipping company. At night, 3 times a week, he stocked shelves at a grocery store. He did not complain about this. He just did it because Jaylen needed new shoes, and the electricity bill was not going to pay itself. Jaylen's mother had left when the boy was just 18 months old. She did not leave with a fight. She did not leave with loud words or broken dishes. She simply packed a bag one Thursday evening and said she was not ready for this kind of life. Marcus had stood in the doorway of that apartment holding a toddler in one arm and a half-eaten jar of baby food in the other hand. Watching her walk to a car he did not recognize. He did not chase her. He did not call her name. He just looked down at his son, who was looking up at him with those big, trusting eyes, and he said quietly, "It's okay. We're going to be okay." And they were. Not easily. Not without pain. But they were okay. The people in Marcus's life were few but loyal. His mother, Gloria, lived 40 minutes away and would come on weekends when she could. His best friend since childhood, a man named Darius, worked at the same shipping company and would often ride with him on long delivery routes, filling the cab of the truck with laughter and old memories. These were the people who kept Marcus standing when he felt like sitting down and not getting back up. Darius was the one who came up with the idea. It started as something innocent enough. A group of guys from the shipping company, maybe 8 or 9 of them, had been talking for weeks about doing a group outing. Nothing fancy, just a Saturday evening at a local restaurant called The Corner Table, which had good food, a small stage where local musicians played, and a relaxed atmosphere that working men appreciated. Someone had suggested they each bring a date or a guest to make it more of a social event. Most of the men had wives or girlfriends. Marcus had no one. Darius thought it would be funny. That was the simple, sad truth of it. He thought it would be funny to call up a woman he knew from his cousin's neighborhood, a woman named Patricia, and quietly arrange for her to show up as Marcus's date for the evening without telling Marcus first. Patricia was a large woman. She was heavy-set, loud in the way some people are when they have learned that the world will not listen unless you make yourself heard, and she had a reputation in certain circles for being difficult to be around. Darius did not dislike Patricia. He just thought the look on Marcus's face when he met her would be worth a laugh. He told 2 of the other guys about the plan, and they laughed too, and so it was decided. Marcus did not know any of this. He only knew that Darius had told him to come dressed nicely, that there would be good food, and that he should relax for once in his life. Marcus had dropped Jaylen off at his mother's house that afternoon, kissed the boy on the forehead, reminded him to listen to Grandma Gloria, and then driven to the corner table in a clean blue button-down shirt and dark pants, the nicest thing he owned that still fit properly. He arrived a few minutes before the rest of the group. He found the table they had reserved near the back of the restaurant, ordered a glass of water, and sat quietly, looking around at the warm lighting and the small stage where a man was tuning a guitar. It was a nice place. He had not been somewhere nice in a long time. The others arrived in groups of 2 and 3. Everyone had someone with them. Wives leaned into their husbands. A girlfriend laughed at something whispered in her ear. Marcus watched all of this with the kind of expression that does not show pain, but holds it carefully behind steady eyes. He smiled when someone greeted him. He shook hands. He laughed at the right moments. He was good at this, at being present in a room while quietly carrying something heavy inside. Then Patricia walked in. She came through the front door of the restaurant in a red dress that was a size too small and heels that made her walk carefully on the polished floor. Her hair was done up. She had lipstick on. She was looking around the room with the slightly nervous expression of someone who is trying very hard to seem like they are not nervous at all. Darius caught her eye from across the room and pointed in Marcus's direction with a grin that he tried to hide behind his hand. At the table, one of the other men, a short guy named Kevin, leaned over to Marcus and said, with a smirk, "Your date's here, man." A few of the others looked over. Someone stifled a laugh. Marcus turned around and saw Patricia walking toward the table. He saw her. He saw the dress that did not quite fit. He saw the nervous look in her eyes. He saw that she was alone, walking toward a table full of strangers, trying to hold her head up. And he understood immediately, not fully, not every detail, but enough, that something was off about this. That she had not walked in here to humiliate him. That she, perhaps, had been part of something she also did not fully understand. He stood up. That was the first thing he did. He simply stood up from his chair, the way a man stands when someone important enters the room. He straightened his shirt. He walked the 3 steps toward her. And when he reached her, he extended his hand and smiled. Not a polite smile. Not a smile that contained any trace of the joke that was hanging in the air around them, but a real, warm, genuine smile, the kind that reaches the eyes and means something. "Hi," he said. "I'm Marcus. I'm really glad you came." Patricia looked at him. She had been preparing herself, on the drive over and in the parking lot, for something unpleasant. Darius's cousin had told her this was a setup, that it was supposed to be funny, that the man would probably be uncomfortable. She had almost not come. She had sat in her car for 4 minutes before deciding to walk in, because something in her had said that she had spent too many years letting other people's jokes keep her at home. So she had come. And now this man was standing in front of her, holding out his hand, looking at her like she was exactly who he had expected and exactly who he was glad to see. She shook his hand. "I'm Patricia," she said, and her voice was steady. He pulled out her chair for her. He did it naturally, without performance, the way his mother had raised him to treat people. He introduced her to the table. He said her name clearly. He did not explain how they knew each other or how the evening had been arranged, because none of that mattered in that moment. What mattered was that there was a woman sitting at his table who deserved to be treated with respect, and he was going to do that. The men who had been waiting for a reaction did not get the one they expected. Kevin looked at his plate. Darius shifted in his seat. The laughter that had been sitting just below the surface of the evening slowly went quiet, like a fire that finds no air. Marcus picked up his menu and asked Patricia if she had ever been to the corner table before. She said no. He said the grilled chicken was very good. She said she liked salmon. He said he thought they had that too, and he checked the menu for her and showed her the page. It was the smallest thing. It was the most ordinary conversation 2 people could have in a restaurant. But every person at that table was watching, and every one of them felt something shift, something they could not quite name, but could not deny. The evening had barely begun, but something had already changed. The food came slowly, the way it does in restaurants where people are meant to sit and talk and not rush back to their lives. Plates were set down, drinks were refilled, and the guitarist on the small stage began to play something soft and familiar, an old soul song that most of the people at the table recognized without being able to name. The mood settled. People began to relax into their conversations, and slowly, the large group at the table broke into smaller ones, the way groups always do when the night gets comfortable. Marcus and Patricia sat at the end of the table, slightly apart from the louder conversations happening near the center. It had not been planned this way. It had simply happened, the way 2 people sometimes find a quiet corner without meaning to. Patricia had ordered the salmon. Marcus had ordered the grilled chicken, just as he said he would. They both had water. Simple choices, made by people who were used to not spending more than they had to. Patricia was a careful talker. She chose her words before she said them, which Marcus noticed and respected. A lot of people talk before they thought. She was not one of them. She answered his questions fully, but did not ramble. She asked questions back, which many people also forgot to do. Marcus found himself genuinely interested in what she was saying, not in the way a person performs interest to be polite, but in the way a man leans forward slightly, without noticing he has done it. She told him she worked at a rehabilitation center on the north side of the city. She helped patients who had suffered strokes or serious injuries learn to do ordinary things again. How to hold a fork, how to button a shirt, how to walk from one end of a room to the other. She had been doing it for 11 years. She said it with no pride in her voice, the way people talk about things they simply love. Marcus asked her what the hardest part of the job was. She thought about it for a moment and said, watching someone give up, when they stop believing they can get back to where they were. She paused and then said quietly, I never let them, if I can help it. Marcus looked at her when she said that, really looked at her. He told her about Jaylen. He told her carefully, watching her face the way parents always watch the faces of people they are telling about their children, looking for the expression that means the listener is only being polite versus the expression that means they are actually interested. Patricia's face showed the second kind. She asked how old Jaylen was. She asked what he liked. Marcus said the boy was wild about trains. Not toy trains, real trains, the kind that traveled across the country, and that he could name types of locomotives the way other kids named superheroes. Patricia laughed at that. Not a laugh that was performing warmth, but a real one, surprised out of her. Smart kid, she said. Smarter than me, Marcus said, and he meant it. Across the table, Darius was watching. He had been watching for most of the evening, though he was trying to do it without being obvious. He had expected the night to go very differently. He had expected awkward silences, maybe a polite 15 minutes before one of them found a reason to leave. What he was watching instead was two people talking the way people talk when they forget to be self-conscious. It made something sit uneasy in his chest. Not jealousy, not quite guilt, but something in between that he did not have a clean name for. Kevin leaned over to Darius and said, under his breath, "Your boy is serious right now." Darius did not answer. He picked up his fork and looked at his food. The musician on the stage shifted into a slower song. A few couples at nearby tables moved to the small open area in front of the stage. Not dancing exactly. More like swaying, the way tired people hold on to each other at the end of a long week. Marcus glanced at the small dance floor and then back at Patricia. He did not ask her to dance. He did not want to push anything, but she had noticed the glance. "You can ask," she said simply. He looked at her. "Would you want to?" "I haven't danced in about 3 years," she said. "But yes." They got up from the table. A few of the men noticed. Someone said something low that Marcus did not hear and did not want to. He offered his hand to Patricia, and they walked to the small space in front of the stage. They were not the most graceful pair. Patricia moved carefully, the way a person does when they are aware of their body in a room full of people. Marcus was not a practiced dancer either. He moved with the steadiness of a man who does not care about looking perfect, only about being present. He placed one hand respectfully at her back. She put her hand on his shoulder, and they moved slowly to the music, not speaking, just listening to the song. It was then that something happened that nobody at the table had prepared for. Patricia's eyes filled with tears. She did not make a sound. She did not stop moving. But 2 tears ran quietly down her face, and she turned her head slightly so that her cheek was angled away from the room. Marcus felt the small change in her posture. He did not say anything immediately. He just kept moving with the music, giving her the space of a few seconds. Then, quietly, close enough that only she could hear, he said, "You okay?" She nodded. Then she said, so quietly it almost disappeared into the music, "Nobody has treated me like this in a long time." Marcus said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "That's their mistake." She looked up at him. He was not smiling in a charming way. He was not trying to say the right thing. He was just telling the truth, simply, the way he told his son the truth, directly and without decoration. Patricia understood this. She had spent enough years around people who spoke carefully to manage her feelings rather than honestly to respect them. This was different. They returned to the table when the song ended. Nobody said anything, but the atmosphere had shifted completely. The joke that had started the evening was gone, not addressed, not called out, just quietly buried under the weight of what had replaced it. Several of the wives and girlfriends at the table had watched the couple on the dance floor. One of them, a woman named Sandra whose husband worked beside Darius, reached over and touched her husband's arm and gave him a look that needed no words. Darius excused himself to use the restroom. He stood at the sink for a while longer than necessary, running cold water over his hands. He looked at himself in the mirror. He had known Marcus for 22 years. He had stood beside him at difficult moments, at his father's funeral, at the hospital the night Jaylen was born, through the months after Jaylen's mother left. He knew Marcus better than almost anyone. And what he had watched tonight was Marcus being exactly who he had always been, a man who treated people with dignity, because that was simply who he was, regardless of who was watching or what the situation was supposed to be. It made Darius feel very small. He came back to the table and sat down. He did not look at Kevin. He did not make any more quiet comments. He picked up his drink and said, across the table, to both Marcus and Patricia, "You two are good together." His voice was even. There was no irony in it. He meant it. Marcus looked at him for a second. He had figured out, somewhere during the evening, what had been arranged and why. He was not angry. He was something more complicated than angry. He was tired of the kind of humor that used people as props, tired in the way a man gets tired of something he has seen too many times. But Darius was his oldest friend, and the man was looking at him now with something honest in his eyes. Marcus nodded once. That was all. Patricia did not know the full story. She knew enough. She had known from the way some of the men had looked at her when she walked in that she had been part of some kind of setup. But Marcus's behavior had made that fact feel smaller as the evening went on, had pushed it further to the edges of the night until it barely occupied any space at all. What occupied the space instead was the salmon she had eaten, the song she had danced to, the way a man she had just met had pulled out her chair and said her name like it mattered. By the time the table began to clear and people reached for their jackets and settled their bills, Marcus and Patricia had exchanged phone numbers. Not in the performative way people sometimes do at the end of an evening, with no intention of following up. Patricia had written her number on a small piece of paper from her purse because she still did things the old way. Marcus had folded it and put it in his shirt pocket, close. Walking out to the parking lot, Darius fell into step beside Marcus for a moment while Patricia said goodbye to Sandra, who had warmed to her considerably over the course of dinner. Darius spoke first. "I owe you an apology," he said. Marcus walked a few more steps. Then he said, "You owe her one more." Darius nodded. He knew that was true. The night air was cool. Cars moved slowly out of the parking lot. Patricia found Marcus near his truck and said she had a good time. He said he did too. He asked if he could call her that week. She said yes. There was no performance in it. Two people, standing in a parking lot under ordinary lights, meaning what they said. It was a small moment. But small moments are sometimes the ones that carry the most weight. Marcus drove to his mother's house to pick up Jaylen. The boy was already asleep on Gloria's couch, one shoe still on, one shoe on the floor. Marcus stood in the doorway for a minute, just looking at him. Then he picked him up carefully, the shoe falling off entirely, and carried him to the truck. Gloria came to the door in her robe. She looked at her son's face and said, "You look different." Marcus thought about that. "I had a good night," he said. She studied him for a moment the way mothers study their children even when they are grown, reading things in their faces that the children do not know are visible. Then she nodded and kissed Jaylen on the cheek. "Good," she said. "You deserve one." Marcus drove home with his son asleep in the back seat. The folded piece of paper was still in his shirt pocket. He thought about Patricia walking into that restaurant alone, holding her head up. He thought about what she had said while they were dancing. He thought about the way she had talked about her patients, the ones who stopped believing they could get back to where they were, and the way she had said, quietly and firmly, that she never let them give up if she could help it. He thought she was remarkable, and he thought he would tell her so when he called. Marcus called on a Tuesday evening. He had planned to wait until Wednesday, not because he was playing any kind of game, but because Tuesday was a delivery shift and he did not get home until nearly 7. And by the time he had made dinner for Jaylen, helped him with a worksheet about animals, and gotten him to brush his teeth and lie down, it was already close to 9. He sat on the edge of his bed in the quiet apartment, the small folded piece of paper open in his hand, and he thought briefly about the hour and whether it was too late. Then he called anyway. Patricia answered on the third ring. She sounded like someone who had been awake, not someone pulled from sleep. Her voice was even, the same careful voice he had heard at the restaurant. He said it was Marcus, in case she had not saved the number. She said she had saved it. He said he hoped it was not too late to call. She said it was not. They talked for an hour and 40 minutes. Neither of them planned to. The conversation moved the way conversations do when two people are genuinely curious about each other, from one thing to another without any forced transitions, each topic opening a small door into the next one. She told him about growing up in Cleveland, the second of 4 children, a father who drove a city bus for 30 years, a mother who had worked in a school cafeteria and somehow made everyone who came through that line feel like they mattered. Marcus told her about his father, who had died of a heart attack when Marcus was 19, and how that had changed the shape of everything that followed. He did not say this with heaviness. He said it plainly, because it was simply part of his story. Before they got off the phone, Marcus asked if she would like to meet again. He suggested something daytime, something simple. There was a park near his apartment with a walking trail along a small creek. He said Jaylen liked it there and often brought bread to throw to the ducks, even though the sign by the water said not to feed the animals. Patricia laughed at that. She said yes, she would come. They met at the park on a Saturday morning. Jaylen was wearing a blue jacket and carrying a small bag of torn bread pieces that he had put together himself with great seriousness. When Marcus introduced him to Patricia, the boy looked up at her with the direct, unfiltered attention that young children give to strangers, studying her face the way he studied everything. Thoroughly, without judgment, just gathering information. Then he held out his bag and said, "Do you want to help feed the ducks? My dad says we're not supposed to, but we do anyway." Patricia looked down at him, and something in her face went soft in a way that was impossible to fake. "I definitely want to help," she said. Jaylen took that as full permission and turned and ran toward the creek. Marcus shook his head. "He has no patience," he said. Patricia smiled and said, "Neither did I at 7. They walked after the boy together. It was a slow morning. The kind that feels longer than it is, in the best way. They walked the trail. Jaylen ran ahead and came back and ran ahead again, as children do, using twice the energy of the adults around them. Patricia asked him questions about the trains he liked. Jaylen answered with the exhausting detail only a child can produce when speaking about something they love: types of locomotives, historical routes, a particular bridge somewhere in Pennsylvania that he had seen in a book and wanted to visit someday. Patricia listened to all of it. She did not pretend. She asked follow-up questions. At one point Jaylen said, very seriously, "You actually know how to listen," and Marcus had to turn his face away briefly to hide that he was moved by this. On the walk back to the parking lot, Jaylen slipped his hand into Patricia's without any announcement, the way children sometimes reach for the hand of someone they have decided to trust. Patricia looked down at his small hand in hers. She did not make a sound. But Marcus, walking on the other side of the boy, saw her face, and he understood what it meant. The weeks that followed moved carefully. Marcus was not a man who rushed things. He had learned, the hard way, that love built on speed often collapses just as fast. He called Patricia 3 or 4 times a week. They met for lunch once, dinner once, and another visit to the park with Jaylen. Each time felt easy. Not easy in the sense of requiring no effort, but easy in the sense of feeling natural, like something that had been waiting to happen rather than something being forced into shape. Darius, for his part, had done what Marcus told him to do. He had called Patricia within a week of the dinner and apologized. He had not done it briefly or casually. He had said that what he arranged was unkind, that it had used her as the subject of a joke she had not agreed to be part of, and that she deserved better than that. Patricia had listened quietly and then said, "I appreciate that." She did not say it was fine, because it had not been fine, but she said she appreciated it, because she did. That was enough. Word spread the way word always spreads in tight communities. The other men from the dinner table heard, through their wives and through Darius, that Marcus and Patricia had been seeing each other. The reaction was not what anyone might have predicted if they had stood in that restaurant parking lot on the night of the dinner and tried to imagine forward. There was no mockery. There was, instead, something quieter, a kind of collective recognition that something had happened that reflected on all of them, and that the reflection had not been comfortable. Sandra, Kevin's wife, was the one who said it most directly. She said it to Kevin one evening at their kitchen table, without looking up from what she was doing. She said, "That man showed everybody something that night, and most of you should be embarrassed." Kevin did not argue. He knew she was right. 3 months after the dinner at the corner table, Marcus did something he had not done in years. He dressed Jaylen in his best clothes, a small button-down shirt and dark pants that his grandmother had bought him, and he drove to a church on the east side of the city where his mother sang in the choir. He had not been to church regularly since his father died, but his mother had been asking him to bring Jaylen, and something in him felt ready for it. Not for religion specifically, but for the ritual of it, the act of showing up in a place that expected something from you. Patricia met them there. She wore a deep green dress and her hair was pulled back, and she sat beside Gloria in the pew, and the two women were talking before the service began with the ease of people who have been exchanging information about a person they both love. Marcus sat on the other side of Jaylen and listened to them talk and felt something he had not felt in a very long time. Something quiet and solid, like standing on ground that was not going to shift. Gloria pulled him aside after the service, in the small lobby area, while Jaylen ran circles around a column nearby. She took his face in both her hands, the way she had done since he was small, and she looked at him for a long moment. She is a good woman, Gloria said. I know, Marcus said. Don't be slow about it, she said. He laughed, a real laugh, from the chest. Mama, I mean it, she said, and let go of his face. What happened next happened gradually, the way all real things happen. Patricia became part of the rhythm of Marcus and Jaylen's life. Not replacing anything, there was nothing to replace, but adding to it. On the evenings she came over, the apartment felt different. There was more laughter. Jaylen started calling her Pat, which she allowed, and occasionally called her my Pat when talking about her to other people, which she did not correct because it quietly undid her every time. She and Marcus had the serious conversations that two adults in their 30s must have, about where each of them stood, about what they wanted and did not want, about what a future might look like if they were both honest about building one. These conversations were not easy. They were, however, honest. One evening in late autumn, about 7 months after the dinner, Marcus and Patricia sat on the small couch in his apartment after Jaylen had gone to sleep. The television was on, but neither of them was watching it. Patricia said, out of the silence, "Do you know what I thought when I walked into that restaurant?" Marcus looked at her. "What?" "I thought, 5 minutes, and then I'm leaving," she said. "I almost didn't walk in at all." She was quiet for a moment. "I sat in my car for 4 minutes." Marcus was quiet too. Then he said, "I'm glad you counted." She looked at him. He was looking at her with that same expression she had noticed on the very first night, steady, direct, without performance. The expression of a man who meant what he said. "So am I," she said. The story of Marcus Webb and Patricia did not end with a grand gesture. It did not end with a speech or a dramatic declaration in front of a crowd. What it ended with, or rather, what it became, was ordinary. Beautifully, steadily ordinary. A man who got up every morning for his son, who treated a stranger with dignity when he had no reason to perform and no audience asking him to, who folded a piece of paper with a phone number on it and put it close to his chest. A woman who walked through a door when she could have driven away, who listened to a 7-year-old talk about trains, who held a small hand in hers and did not make a sound. The joke that began the evening never became a story anyone repeated with laughter. It became, instead, a story people repeated carefully, in kitchens and parking lots and church lobbies, as a reminder of what a single quiet act of decency can open up when a person chooses it without being asked. Jaylen, for his part, knew none of the details of how the evening had started or what anyone had intended. He only knew that his father had brought someone into their life who listened when he talked and asked good questions, and once, on a park trail by a creek, had held his hand for no reason except that he had offered it. That was enough. That was more than enough. And in the small apartment on the east side of Columbus, where a man and his son had been enough for each other for a long time, there was now a little more light. Not a flood of it. Just enough to see by. Just enough to keep walking forward. That, in the end, is all any of us need.